So this is the last time I'm ever going to be at this house. This house that I've lived at for 7 or 8 years now. And because of that, when I look around, I can't help but reminisce about all the work that my loved ones and I have put into making it what it is today. See, when I bought this house, it was nasty. The previous owners, as far as I could tell, had both substance abuse and anger issues, as evidenced by what they left behind and the holes they had punched in the walls and kicked in the doors. They also let a bunch of the cabinets all rot out because they didn't want to fix the leaks in them, and several of the walls were just chock full of mold. And sure, the kitchen had highways of roach feces in it that you could smell from the front door, but it's what I could afford, so I bought it, and I began to gut it. I tore out the flooring and the carpeting and the subflooring in a lot of cases, and all the cabinets, and I even had to collect and throw away 2 20-foot dumpsters full of their random nasty junk that I left behind. Now, unfortunately, I had to move out of my apartment 2 weeks after purchasing this home, so I had only gutted this house and not remodeled it in any way when I moved in. So 2 years into my PhD, I found myself getting out of the shower in the morning and walking across the exposed OSB subflooring in my bedroom. And that's no big deal, of course, except for the fact that the previous owners had what I hope were pets pee all over the floor, which causes the OSB subflooring to bubble up and blister off, and you get particles of it going everywhere. So those particles would stick to my feet that were wet from the shower. And of course I had no kitchen, I had torn that all out. So if I wanted to eat anything hot, I had to cook it on a hot plate here in the living room, or just eat cold cans, is what I typically did. And then there was a whole saga about a mouse being dead and the air duct line underneath where you are right now. So I suppose I'll spare you pictures of the partially decomposed mouse corpse that I was eventually able to extract from my air ducts, but I do want to add a quick PSA. Check your air ducts and see if they need cleaning, because I was rather horrified when I pulled off the register of my floor vents to see what all apparently had just fallen in there and then been forgotten for all time. There was junk and dust and toys, and one other thing had apparently fallen in there, and I found it while opening the unit in the basement, and it was a frog. A frog was stuck on the heating coils and had been fried there. He had apparently jumped into the floor vent at some point when they may have had a pet frog in the past, hopped along the air duct, and then fallen into the unit in the basement where he got stuck on the coils and then was roasted when they turned them on the next time. Eventually, I was able to extract him from the coils, mostly intact, but still rather crumbly. And to think that he had been there for untold numbers of years, with air blowing past him for us to breathe. So yeah, check your ducts, see if they need cleaning. And no, this is not an advertisement. Anyway, all of this was just to say that the house was rough. It was a bit rough, but over the years of my PhD, the house slowly began to come together. I got new flooring and new cabinets throughout, and I got a new AC unit and water heater and so much else. Till eventually the house began to kind of feel like a home. And that's all because of the blood and sweat that we put into it. Now, that's exactly what C.S. Lewis says happens with us as people if we're trying to grow better. And in Mere Christianity, Lewis brings up an analogy with the home and says, imagine this renovation, this remodel, from the home's perspective. He says, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew those jobs needed doing, and so you're not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers and making courtyards. You thought you were going to be made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. Now, obviously this house is not a palace, but it's better than it was before, and progress has been made. And in fact, where it is now is all the more impressive given where it came from. And that's a whole other video that I want to make sometime. But for now, Lewis is saying that the house doesn't enjoy the remodeling process because it hurts and it doesn't understand what's happening. And we see this exact image in Narnia with the undragoning of Eustace, where Aslan has to use his talons to cut through the thick dragon hide that Eustace has on him to peel it off so that he can be made new. And it hurts. And this makes me think back to my past, and I have to wonder if I have been trying hard enough to grow, because it hasn't hurt much. And I bet you there's places that I need to do painful things so that I can grow. Now, of course, there are a lot of things that can get in the way of our growing when we need to grow. But I want to talk about two of them today. The first one is us just not knowing what needs to change, or not thinking it does need changing. For example, there are a lot of things inside of us that we don't attribute to being representative of who we are, and therefore we think that they're excusable and don't need to be altered. Lewis gives an example of this earlier on in the same book with another home analogy that has stuck with me since undergrad when I first read this book. He says, "We begin to notice, besides our particular sinful acts, our sinfulness. Begin to be alarmed not only by what we do, but about what we are. This may sound rather difficult, so I will try to make it clear from my own case. When I come to my evening prayers and try to reckon up the sins of the day, 9 times out of 10, the most obvious one is some sin against charity. I have sulked or snapped or sneered or snubbed or stormed. And the excuse that immediately springs to my mind is that the provocation was so sudden and unexpected. I was caught off my guard. I had not time to collect myself." Now, that may be an extenuating circumstance as regards those particular acts. They would obviously be worse if they had been deliberate or premeditated. On the other hand, surely what a man does when he is taken off his guard is the best evidence for what sort of a man he is. Surely what pops out before the man has time to put on a disguise is the truth. If there are rats in a cellar, you are most likely to see them if you go in very suddenly. But the suddenness does not create the rats. It only prevents them from hiding. In the same way, the suddenness of the provocation does not make me an ill-tempered man. It only shows me what an ill-tempered man I am. Oof. And that's convicting, because even during the course of prepping for this video, I found myself getting snippy with someone in particular a few times. She just makes it so easy. And that's when my true character comes out, with that kind of provocation. And that's what I need to work on. And I think this idea comes pretty directly from George MacDonald, especially in his fairy tales. I find that the most explicit example of it is in The Wise Woman, or The Lost Princess. In this story, Rosamund has actually been kidnapped by the Wise Woman, which sounds a little weird, but the Wise Woman has Rosamund's best interest in mind, and in fact is trying to help her grow. And much of this story is showing the discomfort that causes Rosamund, because she doesn't understand what's happening, and it hurts. In this particular part of the story, Rosamund has had a little bit of a temper tantrum and refused to enter the Wise Woman's cottage while the Wise Woman was with her, and so the Wise Woman leaves. And eventually Rosamund wants to go in the cottage, having had a rather trying night with wolves and such outside, and so she goes into the cottage and begins to feel better when she's in there. And because she's feeling safer and more comfortable, she begins to think that she's actually doing better than she is. I'll start in here. He says, "What with the sufferings and terrors that she had left outside, the new kind of tears she had shed, the love she had begun to feel for her parents, and the trust she had begun to place in the Wise Woman, it seemed to her as if her soul had grown larger of a sudden, and she had left the days of childishness and naughtiness far behind her. People are so ready to think themselves changed when it is only their mood that is changed. Those who are good-tempered because it is a fine day will be ill-tempered when it rains. Their selves are just the same both days, only in one case the fine weather has got into them, in the other the rainy." And sure enough, because Rosamund's feeling so content with herself, she ends up forgetting about her surroundings and letting the fire die out in the cottage. And right then she gets scared and begins to scream at and curse the old Wise Woman who let this happen. And later on, MacDonald says, "Strange to say, the princess never thought of telling herself now how naughty she was, though that would surely have been reasonable. On the contrary, she thought she had a perfect right to be angry, for was she not most desperately ill-used, and a princess too? So all this to say, it's sometimes hard to see our blind spots without the help of old wise women to tell us what they are. So that's one barrier to our spiritual growth, just not being able to see what needs changing. And there's another one that I have a lot of experience with, and that is something you may not have thought of before: theology. As someone who spent many years as an atheist, when I came back to the faith, I wanted to be sure that I wasn't going to be taken in or misled by some backwards thinking. I wanted to make sure that what I was putting my faith in was correct. So there are many years, like a decade, I spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure out correct theology instead of just doing what I knew was right. MacDonald touches upon this in his Unspoken sermons, specifically the sermon called The Truth in Jesus. And in it, he talks about and gives a rather vivid image of what the costs of that behavior can be. He says, "Get up and do something the master tells you. So make yourself his disciple at once. Instead of asking yourself whether you believe or not, ask yourself whether you have this day done one thing because he said, do it. Or once abstain because he said, do not do it. It is simply absurd to say that you believe, or even want to believe in him, if you do not anything he tells you. We must learn to obey him in everything, and so must begin somewhere. Let it be at once, and in the very next thing that lies at the door of our conscience." And a few pages later, he says, "If you who set yourselves to explain the theory of Christianity had set yourselves instead to do the will of the Master, the one object for which the gospel was preached to you, how different would now be the condition of that portion of the world with which you come into contact. Had you given yourselves to the understanding of his word that you might do it, and not to the quarrying from it of material wherewith to buttress your systems, in many a heart by this time would the name of the Lord be loved, where now it remains unknown. The word of life would then by you have been held out indeed. Men, undeterred by your explanations of Christianity, for you would not be forcing them on their acceptance, and attracted by your behavior, would be saying to each other, as Moses said to himself when he saw the bush that burned with fire and was not consumed, I will now turn aside and see this great sight. They would be drawing nigh to behold how these Christians loved one another, and how just and fair they are to everyone that had to do with them. To note that their goods were the best, their weight the surest, their prices the most reasonable, their word most certain, that in their families was neither jealousy nor emulation, that mammon was not there worshipped, that in their homes selfishness was neither the hidden nor the openly ruling principle, that their children were as diligently taught to share as some are to save, or to lay out only upon self, their mothers more anxious lest the child should hoard than lest he should squander. That's convicting. That if I had just spent more energy helping those around me and being a good person, and less energy explaining the theory of Christianity, how much better would the world be? How much better would I be? And we see the same notion come up in MacDonald's other book, Thomas Wingfold's Curate. In this book, Thomas Wingfold, a pastor, has had a sudden bout of doubt and has to navigate that. And in this particular scene, he's thinking to himself how readily he would have followed Jesus and gotten truth if he had just been there and seen him. He says, if I had but seen him, would not I have minded him? Would I not have haunted his steps with question upon question until I got at the truth? But then the words come to his mind of Jesus saying, why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? To this, Thomas Wingfold says, good God, here I am bothering over words and questioning about this and that, as if I were testing his fitness for a post I had to offer him. and he all the time claiming my obedience. I cannot even, on the spur of the moment at least, tell one thing he wants me to do. And as to doing anything because he told me, not once did I ever. But then, how am I to obey him until I'm sure of his right to command? I just want to know whether I am to call him Lord or not. No, that won't do either, for he says, why, even of yourselves judge ye not what is right? And do I not know? Have I ever even doubted that what he said we ought to do was the right thing to do? Yet here have I, all these years, been calling myself a Christian, ministering, forsooth, in the temple of Christ, as if he were a heathen divinity who cared for songs and prayers and sacrifices, and cannot honestly say I ever once in my life did a thing because he said so, although the record is full of his earnest, even pleading words. I have not been an honest man, and how should a dishonest man be a judge over a man who said he was the Christ of God? Would it be any wonder if the things he uttered should be too high and noble to be by such a man recognized as the truth? And that was me for years, and that's what I would like to change. But notice what he says there at the end. Would it be any wonder if the things he uttered should be too high and noble to be by such a man recognized as truth? So that's where the house isn't able to understand what changes need to be made in it and can't picture what it's going to be in the future. Now, when I first read to you that quote by Lewis about the house being in pain when it was having the remodel done, I left off the first sentence of that paragraph. He says, I find I must borrow yet another parable from George MacDonald. And the parable that I think he's referring to comes from The Diary of an Old Soul, a collection of poems by MacDonald, one for every day of the year. And the 2 days that I think bear relevance to this portion of the text come from July 15th and 16th and are talking about how God has more lofty plans than we can understand. Just like his words are too noble and high for someone like me or someone like Thomas Wingfold to have understood when we were just going through the motions. He says, going back to the house analogy, too eager I must not be to understand. How should the work the master goes about fit the vague sketch my compasses have planned? I am his house for him to go in and out. He builds me now, and if I cannot see at any time what he's doing with me, 'tis that he makes the house for me too grand. The house is not for me, it is for him. His royal thoughts require many a stair, many a tower, many an outlook fair, of which I have no thought and need no care. Where I am most perplexed, it may be there thou makest the secret chamber wholly dim, where thou wilt come to help my deepest prayer. So God's plans are more lofty than we can imagine, and we don't know what he's trying to grow us into. And that's an image that MacDonald brings up in another one of his sermons. So I'll leave you with this last little thought. It's from the sermon, The New Name. And he says that the tree of the soul, before its blossom comes, cannot understand what blossom it is to bear. For too long, I have been a tree in dormancy. Or as Milton says, my late spring no bud or blossom sheweth. But I want to grow, I want to blossom, and that might require some difficult choices and pain, but that'll be worth it. I'll see you next time. Welcome to my first house. It is dark outside, so I will show you the exterior in the future, but I wanted to get started cleaning the inside for several reasons, and so I'm going to show you the inside first, and then I'll start cleaning it up tonight and then show you the outside later. Walk in the front door, and you have trash, but laminate flooring with some cracks and splits and warping and buckling and whatnot, puckering of the seams. some windows here. Some have issues with double pane being, the seal being broken, so we'll see if I replace those. Probably not, because that sounds expensive. We have this lovely antler chandelier, like awkwardly affixed to the ceiling fan. Holes in the wall, well, there's one right there. But you walk through here and you get to the kitchen. Those doors take you to the unsafe back deck, which you'll see in a later video. And I will have to dismantle that deck anyway, but this is actually hardwood floor. It's in good condition, except for all the roach carcasses that are on it and the living roaches. Lots of roach hotels in this cabinet. And these countertops and these cabinets are kind of in worse for wear condition. I should drain that sink soon. And then that door is missing for some reason, but I don't know. We'll see what we do with this blocking your vision to the other rooms, and that blocking your vision to the other rooms might get remedied. Another broken seal on the window there. I don't know what happened to this toilet. Bedroom one, these will probably stay about the same, except for this horrendous carpet will go. Oh no, there's like a cliff right here. You gotta climb up to get out of this room. Uh-oh. Like the floor isn't even. Pretty standard. You have your Undead Nightmare and you have your SpongeBob. And a really cool looking closet here for this kid. It's bigger than my closet in the master. That's, I think, a cutout so you don't knock off your head going down into the basement. Go to the master first though. Some angry door kicking happened. Probably. Dip cans by the bed, like you do. And closet. Broken mirror. And I wonder if this is good underneath the sink. Oh yeah, that's great. Okay, well, didn't realize that. And then ants were in here. So I'm gonna get everything looked at. I'm gonna take apart. I'm gonna open all the windows after I put screens on them, take apart all the bases of the sinks, clean and encapsulate, etc. Going into the coolness of the basement, I turn on the light. There is more holes at the bottom. And then going down this way, you have what looks to be vinyl planking, which is pretty nice and in good condition. Where the washer and dryer would go, I think I might partition this off so it's a little more sightly, because that's a furnace and water heater. A door to the outside world. There was a hole to the outside world right there. So I stuffed it with this tiger, which Christina then later mentioned has had its throat slit and its tongue cut off or chewed off, but at least its throat thoroughly slit. So that's comforting. Hole in the ceiling there. I've got to take care of that too, probably. But how one does that with those pipes, yet to be determined. So I started cleaning and I realized I should give a tour before I do so. And this is what we have before we start. The water turnoff is underneath there somewhere. This giant garage has this giant trash can, which was heaping full of beer cans. Slowly get nibbling at that. I brought some of the food from outside, from inside last night out here so the roaches would maybe calm down. This is the garage. I've got to go through this maybe today as much as I can and throw away as much as I can. This is already deemed trash. I was waiting for a dumpster. I haven't decided if I'm going to get one right away or finish projects and then get one. Back here we have various and sundry pen-like things, and chicken coop, which is really nice. It even comes with a complimentary dead chicken inside, back there. And then there's like a little door they can get into this cage. But yeah, so that is, I think, the entirety of the house. So we will see what it looks like after I've played with it a bit. The new buyers are going to be here in 45 minutes, hopefully. Hopefully they don't come early. Find me here eating pupusas on the floor. I was trying to do the video earlier today. I mean, I've been sitting here doing it for hours now because the neighbor decided to do some major renovations on the trees nearby by having a giant, like, flying bush hog come chop them up. Not good for sound design. But I'm glad we got that video knocked out. It would have been less impactful if I had to do it somewhere else, like in the woods. It wouldn't make sense.